Hi folks, it's Welly speaking. Welcome to video number 3. In this video, we are going to take a look at the sample app along with the database and how they are deployed on Azure as a resource. So to get started, I'm going to bring you to take a look at the database and the resource on Azure first. And let me move to my Azure portal. So I have two separate resource groups. The first resource group I named it RGDR demo. So this basically consists a bunch of resources which will be deployed, which will be containing my resource that I tend to deploy in my primary region. In this example, is Southeast Asia. I also have a set of resources that are deployed on my secondary region. Most of them are actually in East US. All right. Actually, this is optional. That I I use two resource group and containing the. If you want, you can put it within the same resource group. I think that's perfectly fine. But I decided to split them into two different logical resource group. What I want to show you next is the SQL Server and the SQL database. Right. First of all, I have product server SCA. So this is my logical SQL server. And then inside this logical SQL server, I have a database called a product DB, right? And this product DB obviously will have their own connection string, which you could find over here, right? Typically how the connection string is being defined, it's the server name dot database.windows.net, and then the database as the initial catalog, and so on. But within the demo, we will not be pointing to this directly. Instead, we will be using something called Failover Group. Um, Back to the server, the SQL server, you can see that we have the Failover Group. How it does, how the failover works is you create a group, a logical group, and then you define which other database do you want to contain within the group. And what it does is, first of all, it will make sure that it will replicate over to the other region which you can choose. In this example here, because my primary regions, I've chosen Southeast Asia, and then I choose the secondary region as CCUS. Obviously, you can add another one if you want to. So that's one thing to make sure that the data will be replicated accordingly. The second thing that I want you to pay attention is the listener endpoint. Um, we in fact have two listener endpoint. One is for read write, or AKA master, and the second one is a read only listener. So these are the connection string that we will be using from our app perspective. And the reason why we'll be using that is when we perform a failover, we don't have to change anything on the database, on the application itself. Um, and the database will failover from one region to the other region. So let me move to the SQL Server Management Studio, where I have connected the tools with both primary endpoint and the secondary endpoint, which is read only over here. Now, first of all, let me select the orders and execute it. As you can see that I have 6 record. Now the second, likewise, I'm going to show you the second, the read or the read only database. And likewise, if I were to perform an execution here, it will show you exactly the same thing. Now, the second thing that I want to demonstrate is perform an update from the primary, and we will see that how soon it will replicate over to the secondary. So I'll just simply try to modify the quantity of the order number 3, and then click execute. Okay, and it say that this is successfully executed. Let's verify from the first, or from primary first. There we go. This is successfully executed. Let's move to the secondary one, and over the secondary one, let's perform execution again. And you can see that in very, very fast, actually, like a couple of seconds or millisecond, you see that the record has been successfully updated. Now the question is, what about we perform update on the secondary, which is labeled as read only? And I bet we won't be able to do that, but why don't we just give it a try? Let's change it to 592 and perform an update onto the secondary database. Now, as you can see that it says you won't be able to perform the database update on the database because it is at read only. Okay, so that is pretty much of my of the database that we have configured. Let's switch gear to the applications. I'm going to move back to my Azure portal again. And now, as you can see that I have my simple app deploy as an app service, and I name it Web API SEA. Likewise, I have the same thing deploy in East US, and I name it Web API East US. Okay, I'm going to switch back to the first one. Um, what I've done is deploy a web API, which I will be showing you shortly. But what we also have done is register the endpoint of the web API SEA into a traffic manager. So as you can see that the traffic manager profile over here is deployed at global scale, not one of the particular region. So if I open my web API Valley, so this is my traffic manager. First of all, it will have its own domain endpoint. Over here is Valley Web API.trafficmanager.net. I optionally you can definitely bind it to your custom domain. In fact, I have done that with my custom domain. But what's more important is I have registered two endpoints over here. The first endpoint is obviously the Web API SEA. The second one is Web API East US. And I've chosen the priority load balancing method as and giving the Southeast Asia the priority 1 and the East US priority number 2. All right, and as you can see that both of them are online right now. Both of them are in fact Azure endpoint, but if you want, you can add like say the third one and choose the other type of endpoint, including the public external endpoint like public IP address and so on. So this is where you can perform the additions of another endpoints. I do want to show you the other configurations which are pretty important here. We support the different protocol, as I mentioned on the previous crash course. Two things that I want to highlight very important here is the probing interval. So you can see that this is the probing interval which you can choose either from or 10 seconds or 30 seconds. So what it does is basically the heartbeats ping between the traffic manager to the endpoint of the original applications. Another one is a tolerated number of failure. So basically what it does is how many times can you tolerate the failure after each 10-second interval probing. So that means if I set the probing interval to 10 seconds and tolerated number of failure to 3 times, so approximately within 3 times of 10 seconds, if the first priority still isn't up and running or down, what it does it will fail over to the second priority. So approximately about 30 seconds or so. So this is what we have configured on our traffic manager. So next thing that I want to show you is my application. So my application is rather simple. It's just a ASP.NET web API. The main code is on my order controller. I have a get order controller, and what it does is basically trying to pull out the list of order from my database. What I have also add something, some custom header, and actually this is just for my convenience. I'm getting the region name of the web so that we know eventually when we perform a request which web server region this is being returned from, as well as a database server name, right? Another one is actually I'm adding the total number of records as well. So this is just more for my convenience. The second method that I have is for adding an order, basically. As you can see that I can pass in the product code or quantity. Actually, I also have another overloading method where you don't even have to pass anything. I will just randomly generate the product code or a quantity for you, and it will execute this add or pause. As you can see that nothing too fancy. I just perform an add of a new records along with the quantity to the SQL Server. And then likewise, the previous one, it will returns the web region name as well as database server region name. Now, I'm going to show you how I use the entity framework and store my database connection string. As you can see that over here, I have my connection strings within my web config, all right? And then if I were to scroll all the way down a little bit, you will realize that the connection strings of this is product group database.windows.net, right? So this is not the original name of the database server. So this is the group endpoint. And I explained to you earlier that the benefit of using this is when you perform a database failover, this is transparent. You don't even have to touch your application at all, and the database can transparently failover. Okay. Um, that's all basically for my third video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.